Welcome back to the Fanspeak Network and another episode of Sibling Showdown. This time it is the strategy edition of Sibling Showdown. We just did a live draft. Be sure to check that out on the Fanspeak Network. Also, be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the Fanspeak Network if you haven't already. And in this episode, we're talking strategy. And I'm Meg. You can follow me at Megs08DFS. And of course, joined by my sibling, my brother, Steve. You can follow him at SteveOSpeak. Steve, how are you doing today? And are you ready to do a little strategy talk? I know we like to do that just as much as drafts, pretty much.
Yeah, doing well. Always like talking fantasy and best ball. And the strategy side, I think, is, that's what separates people, the casual from the more intense player. And that's where I think the edge is.
Yeah, I mean, we have so much fun. We have 4 live drafts at minimum on Fanspeak Network each week, but we like mixing these strategy shows because without that, what are we doing here? We got to make sure we're applying these strategies. Yes, we have to be strong on our player takes, and we talk about that obviously on strategy shows sometimes, obviously within all of our drafts. But we also need to talk through strategies to consider, and a lot of this is also on Fanspeak Network. So that'd be a good point to put that banner up. Check out all of our articles, on fanspeak.com. Check out our articles. They are free on fanspeak.com. We have a best ball headquarters with different hubs that you can find different articles about strategy, player takes, best ball playoffs, and more. Steve's rankings are up there. So be sure to check that out on fanspeak.com. Steve, today what we are talking about is Timebox tournaments. Hopefully Underdog will be releasing one soon, but this is something that we can listen back to anytime this summer as Timebox tournaments are released. And there will be, as we has seen thus far this summer, continuous Timebox tournaments release. And what that means is the tournaments that are going to fill basically immediately, whether it's one day, some of them fill so fast, or a week or two. It depends obviously on the sizing and the pricing usually, but Underdog is smart that they have these big flagship tournaments that are going to stay open pretty much all summer long. But then they drop these Timebox tournaments for us. And these tournaments are, again, anything from like the puppies to the higher stakes ones like the Dalmatian just filled, and anything in between. I know you and I both maxed the poodle and the hound dog and the pug and all different price points there. But that's what's so great. They are Timebox tournaments are going to fill anywhere from like a day to a week or two, depending on the size and price. They are usually have like a max. Usually, some of them, like the puppies, are 150 max, but some of them are single entry, 3 max, 5 max, 10 max, 20 max, whatever it is. It can allow you to do it that way. But what I love the most about it is the advance rates are so much better than the lotto style tournaments, and that means that if you make the playoffs, then it's more like a 1 of 5, 1 of 6, 1 of 8 situation to progress in the playoffs. And that's the biggest mistake I personally made last year, is I didn't have many tournament allocation to really anything outside of, the BBM lottos, and then the ones that were like 1 of 12, 1 of 10 to advance. And so I'm really, really paying attention to the advance rate. So I'm going to be hammering these types of tournaments. And so this episode will be able to apply all summer long. So I just named some of my favorite things about Timebox tournaments. I'm sure you agree with a lot of those. And what are your favorite things?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with all of them. I think it's the fact that, the advance rates are definitely key, but that's obviously a direction Underdog's been moving in for all the tournaments, even the bigger lottos, but definitely these smaller ones. But yeah, these smaller tournaments that do fill within a day or two or even a week, it's just nice to get your action out there, get it done, and what you have. It's not, and we'll get into some of the reasons why that's important, but you're not worried about major ADP movement. You're not worried about injuries or depth chart, movement at certain positions. You're taking your stand, and that's what everyone who is drafting at that time is taking that same stand. Whether it's right or wrong, you're all drafting with the same information, which is to me the number one thing about these things.
Yeah, basically off the top of my head, like just highlighting quickly the biggest benefits to summarize what we've just been saying, how much we love these tournaments. And I want pretty much as much exposure to these tournaments as I do BBM this year. but it's the advance rates are better, whether you're into like the single entry, 3 max, 5 max, you have that aspect. But what we love the most is we're all working with the same information. So yes, you could get overexposed to a particular guy who then gets injured in training camp, and other people maybe don't, but we're all working with the same information at that time. So those are the biggest kind of benefits to these tournaments. Now let's talk strategies to these tournaments, because there are some things that we can do a little differently in these tournaments to maybe give ourselves a little more edge or diversify our portfolio. So number one, I think the thing that I like in these tournaments doing is I like to give myself permission to do different strategies, especially in the cheaper buy-ins. So if it's anywhere from $3 or $4 to $15, I get a little different in my strategy builds, not all the time, but just more often. I mean, my favorite type of builds, well documented here on Fanspeak Network and fanspeak.com, is 3-5-7-3. It's what got me to the BBM3 finals. So I got a big spot in my heart for that type of build. I do some more elite tight ends this year. So now I will do some 3-6, 8-2, or, stuff, or I don't know if I did the number 3-6-7-2, or, mix it up a little bit, but you get my point. Pretty much in all the other stuff, that those are my structure builds. I like mixing in some different structures or strategies that I may not do as much in the other tournaments in the cheaper buy-ins. And that could be hyper fragile and going just 4 running backs, but getting them all pretty early. That could be really late round quarterbacks and just hammering the other positions, and making sure you're really good. And then looking to stack 3 guys in rounds 13 to 18, that you feel comfortable with. That could be drafting 3 or 4 tight ends in the last few rounds that you just see the upside. Those are the type of things that I'm kind of mixing in more so than the other stuff. Do you like mixing in those type of strategies as well?
Yeah, I think it makes more sense to mix in those types of things. I think you have more permission to be unique in these types of tournaments. Not just that, it's also one of the things that I like is the ability to, I feel better about going overweight on a particular player, because, if I'm going overweight on, say, and not even like an early round guy, let's say a mid round guy, let's just throw out a tight end like George Kittle. And if Kittle gets injured in camp, not even like a serious injury where he's missing the whole year, but if he's missing the first couple of weeks, like similar to what Cooper Kupp had last year, and then Kittle's ADP is falling 3, 4, 5 rounds, boy, you're feeling pretty crappy. But even if it's a 20 max and 8 of my teams had George Kittle, I know everyone drafted George Kittle in the same round and a half range.
Yeah.
So it's not like half the teams out there have this major advantage or anything like that, where that happened when Cooper Kupp went down. That happened when, we heard the stuff about Jonathan Taylor last year, or some of these other injuries or holdouts and things of that nature. So with the BBM. So that's the advantage of when you go overweight, you're not hurt as much when the ADP moves. And then even if it's also like an injury that happens during the year, look, you can still advance. Like I know you and I both advanced with guys who, whether it's a Mike Williams or a J.K. Dobbins team or something like that. Sure, the higher up the injury, the harder it is.
Right.
But I had Justin Jefferson teams. I mean, Justin Jefferson missed a good part of the year that advanced. But that's, and then that could make you unique in the playoffs. That's what can be fun about it. But you just don't want to be too overexposed early on, because it obviously is harder when they're getting injured. In these types of tournaments, again, I don't mind it as much because it's small. The total buy-in is not going to be as much. And I know everyone worked with the exact same information the whole process. So I just feel this is where you can be more unique in either the types of builds like you mentioned or the exposures like I'm mentioning.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the player side and the exposures too, and not being afraid to go overweight. Because so say, like you said, if it goes wrong for you, well, you're not hurt as bad as if you were in BBM. But if it goes right, like so say in the Poodle, I've been drafting a ton of Calvin Ridley. I'm obsessed with Calvin Ridley. Have him a ton in the Poodle. Say it's everything I hope and more with Calvin Ridley, right? well, then I'm getting a massive edge in the poodle because probably other people didn't go as overweight as I did in the poodle. You know what I mean? So it's stuff like that like either, mixing up your strategy stands, but then not being afraid to go overweight on a player. And then maybe in a different tournament, maybe then I pump the brakes on Calvin Ridley. So I'm diversified, but then I know if it goes right for Ridley, then my poodles are probably, doing fairly well. So I like that from the whole player stand side too. So that's point number one is how you can diversify your strategies or go overweight on like a certain player. I love that. That's a great point. I think the other thing that you can do is and you and I aren't really into like galaxy braining too much or, doing too much stuff to like get creative. Sometimes I see stuff on Twitter that I think the effort to be unique is a little overblown, of what you actually need. But I do think you can mix up your combos a little different. In these types of tournaments, if you could find a unique combo, that could be pretty key. Because you're dealing with much less people and again, ADPs that aren't shifting. So, if you're doing a 20 max and you have, let's say you got multiple at the end of the draft in the 11th or 12th spot, sure, do some like the way you typically like to do it and or the ADP that falls to you or whatever, but maybe do some where you reach to get a certain type of combination in the first three or something along those lines that would be, wow, this first three start would be really unique. I like doing that too, because I think, again, if it goes right, that could like be a great offset, right?
Yeah, and that's the other, and it's kind of in the same vein where, for instance, like you say, if you have the 12th spot and you start with, let's say Drake London, and you're kind of thinking Gibbs, Harrison, whoever, but what if you take Deebo Samuel and take that stand? And sure, that's down on the list. Go for it. Go for it in this type of tournament. You don't necessarily want to do that in a BBM because what happens a month from now if Deebo gets steamed up to that exact spot, and you feel like, well, I didn't, that's exactly where he should have gone, or the opposite. Of course, he gets a little banged up. He's going to miss the first couple of weeks, and then it's like, boy, I really took it on the chin here. So I just think that's, where you run a greater risk in the tournaments where it's, you could be really hurt to take those types of risks. But in this type of thing, go for a more unique combo. Go for a, make sure you're getting your guys, because like we look at ADP and the way Underdog does it is it's all the season-long tournaments together. So they're judging BBM versus the puppy versus the poodle, etc. But the poodle should be different than the BBM. I mean, in fact, because of some of these smaller finals, like we aren't necessarily shouldn't be waiting week 17 as much in the poodle as we should in the BBM, because you're not talking about a 7-figure payday. Sure, it's a big payday. It's a nice payday. I want that payday.
Yeah.
But my point is, like, if the final's only 120 people versus 500, it's much easier. You don't need that ultimate bring back or whatever that you maybe feel like you do in a BBM.
Well, that's another excellent point. Actually, in strategy is, I think you should lean into player takes a little bit heavier in these types of tournaments. I also think I still do team correlation. Like I'm still stacking my quarterback. I'm still looking for team correlation with or without the quarterback, all the same things I do in that regard. But I'm not forcing game stacks at all because, the finals to these are usually, again, the puppy is different, but like for a lot of these other ones that we mentioned, like whether it's the Dalmatian, a little bit higher stakes, or like something like the poodle, hound dog, pug, that kind of stuff, you're dealing with a much, much smaller final. So don't overweight those game stacks as much as you do in BBM. BBM, you're going to have to beat 530 some people, to take down 1.5 million or get a top prize. It's much, much, much smaller. And so, weight that less and weight, I'd say player takes more. So that's a really good point. The third and final thing that we talked about that I like to do, and not I think with all this stuff, it's like, don't be stupid about any of the things, or maybe don't do all of them in one draft, but kind of mix them in and make sure it's thoughtful. It has a reasoning behind it. And that's what I'm going to say for this next thing is, don't be afraid to draft undrafted players, because in this case, they truly could be, okay, I say undrafted, low drafted players, right?
Mm-hmm.
They could be truly very, very low drafted. If the field size is only, I'm just making up a number. I don't remember what the poodle just was, or the Dalmatian, but like, just let's say pretend the field size is 12,000 entries and it's a 5 entry max or something along those lines. If there's only 12,000 entries total, there's a chance that some of the stands that you're making of guys that are, scrolling down, as long as you don't scroll down too far, are guys that could be almost near to not drafted or very, very, very low drafted. And you could be one of the few people in the entire tournament with them. So that's something you and I are both interested in. And to end this, we're going to have a fun back and forth of 3 of our favorite, so 6 total, guy or guys that we are, players that we are, scrolling down and taking a chance on in clearly the 18th round. So I'll let you go first, Steve. Who is one of your guys that you're scrolling down and trying to say, well, he's not going to be very owned in this Timebox tournament?
So my first guy is going to be A.T. Perry. You'll see him get drafted every now and then in the 18th round, but Saints almost guaranteed to be their 3rd receiver. They drafted Bub Means from the Pitt Panthers in the 5th round this year, but that's basically his only competition for the 3rd receiver. He's used down the stretch last year. Big 6'5", 215 guy, has a little speed. I think he's well behind Olave and Shaheed, but he's a guy who, given his size, given some red zone ability, I think he got 4 touchdowns total last year and very little usage. Didn't even play a game till like week 10, and then didn't start until week 12 when some of these guys got injured. So, if he's out there, you get a couple spike weeks or 2 from him, and I just don't mind that this late. And there's probably a lot of receivers who get drafted ahead of him who don't even have this upside.
Yeah. All right. My first one, put earmuffs on, JJ McCarthy truthers, because my first one is a bit wild, and I don't think many people are doing this at all. But if I have Justin Jefferson or Jordan Addison, or even if I get TJ Hawkinson, I only take him after ADP, or Ty Chandler or something along those lines, I have taken a couple shares of Mr. Sam Darnold. Let's pretend we live in a world where everybody thought Baker Mayfield might get benched for Kyle Trask last year, right? At this time, right? At this time last year, nobody was giving Baker Mayfield the time of day. And he resurged in that offense. It can happen. I'm just saying you have to put like a hypothetical hat on with all these guys. And again, it's your 18th round pick. So again, you don't ever want to take zeros or take zeros later in the season, of course. But if you could put a hypothetical hat on and say, I can make a case for this. First of all, I just think, JJ McCarthy is very green, didn't play in a high volume passing offense at Michigan. I think the best case scenario for him and Minnesota would be if he got a redshirt year. What if, this is the first time that Sam Darnold's playing with these type of weapons. Well, he was the backup of 49ers, but he has a chance to start with these type of weapons. And he's got an insanely good offensive-minded coach in Kevin O'Connell. What if that all just comes together, and playing under Kevin O'Connell and with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler, TJ Hawkinson when he comes back? What if it clicks, and what if it's not what people think and JJ McCarthy isn't starting? It's pretty clear from early camp reports that Sam Darnold's going to be the starter, presumed starter week 1. I think most people think he's going to be benched by, early in the season. I'd say, just maybe not, so I think you're definitely going to get some games on a Sam Darnold, but what if it just goes right like it did for Baker last year? So Sam Darnold is one of my very low owned thing. And I only do it, by the way, when I obviously have a Vikings stack in play.
And one thing I will point out, this is on DraftKings, but 2 years ago, the guy who won the Millie on DraftKings, he actually had 4 quarterbacks at the time when playing around Jordan Love, just presumably thinking Aaron Rodgers might not play or whatever.
He must have,
One of his quarterbacks was Jacoby Brissett.
Yeah.
11 games while Deshaun Watson was out.
Yep.
Wasn't there. He wasn't there for the playoffs. He wasn't there for the finals. But he had some big games,
Valuable weeks. Yeah.
in there to help get the guy to the playoffs.
Yeah.
Especially since Russell Wilson was the guy who won the finals for him. So
Yeah.
he needed those Jacoby Brissett weeks, absolutely. And that could be the exact same thing. Sam Darnold might not be a playoff option for you. So there's a little less value there. But yeah, maybe, like you said, he's paired with the best receiver in the league in Justin Jefferson and some other good weapons as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And if the case that the best case scenario happens and for Darnold, and in this situation, he is playing in weeks 15, 16, 17, you're literally probably one of the only people with him in the playoffs. And if one of those weeks then goes your way, Yahtzee, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the upside for that. Okay. Who's your second player?
My second player, another receiver. I'm going to go with Josh Reynolds from Denver. Everyone knows Courtland Sutton, assuming he doesn't get traded, will be the Broncos' number one receiver. And then their second round pick last year, Marvin Mims Jr., and their fourth round pick this year, Troy Franklin, who it was coincidentally rookie quarterback Bo Nix's college teammate, kind of both drafted around the same area. But it was Josh Reynolds who signed the 2-year, $14 million deal in the offseason. It's Josh Reynolds who, has been Mr. Consistent throughout his career. Granted, that's a career tied with Jared Goff with the Rams and Detroit. And the last time he left Jared Goff, he got cut halfway through the year and went back with Goff to Detroit. Yeah. So we'll see if history repeats itself. But hey, Josh Reynolds gets the job done. He got the job done in the playoffs. He got the job done throughout the year for the Lions. Sean Payton went out and got him for a reason. They spent money on him. They trade away Judy. It just could be that he just beats out these two young guys, and he's the number 2 receiver on this team. They don't have a clear tight end, Greg Dulcich. Who knows if this guy's ever going to be healthy? Denver could be down in most of their games, and he could just get a good chunk of targets. And again, you're getting him 18th round, and almost nobody's going to have him. Yeah,
no, I like that one a lot. I think I've mixed him in some in the big board, but he hasn't been one that I've touched much lately. And I think that's a great point when I want to mix in a little bit. I think that's a great call out. So that's your number 2. My number 2 is just being open to the Colts backup running back situation. I would only do this in 6 or 7 running back builds, like a 0 RB situation, probably not like in like a 5 running back build likely. But if you want to try like a Trey Surman or Evan Hall, obviously as camp reports progress, one might emerge as someone who would get drafted more, like say in August timebacks tournaments. Maybe one of them is like a clear front runner and then is drafted in the 18th round more often. But right now, like say a tournament drops tomorrow in June, end of June, they're likely undrafted or not drafted much. So, I think you could take shots on either of them, and I'd be fine with it. Obviously, you've got contingent. The most upside comes from, not that you'd ever wish injury on anybody, but if there was a Jonathan Taylor injury. But I think they both could have, some value playing into the season as we see so many, backs get mixed in. So I would say I'm not going to do this as much, but I will take some shots in Timebox tournaments on the backup running back situation. Yeah. Okay. Who's your number 3? And
number 3 is tight end Zach Ertz. Everyone has been very high on Ben Sinnott. He's fallen a little bit in ADP, but he's still getting drafted well ahead of other clear starters. And Ertz was with Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona. And if they're breaking in a rookie quarterback, they might choose to go with the veteran tight end, not the fullback converted tight end in Sinnott. I think Sinnott's going to be out there, but as more of a blocker and that kind of thing. Ertz could just be a guy who, you're going to need touchdowns, but that's what it comes down to for tight end 3s. Do they get a touchdown? That's how they get on the board for you. So Ertz, a couple of years ago in half a season, had 4 touchdowns before he tore his ACL. Last year, he kept McBride on the bench early on. Could continue to do the same with Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, I think for Ertz, it's probably just staying healthy. If he stays healthy, I don't see a reason why I don't think Sinnott's going to unseat him just because of pure talent. Like, a lot of times these rookie tight ends, if there is somebody ahead of them, it's hard to unseat them unless there's an injury. So I think if he stays healthy, I love that call out, and nobody's drafting him. In fact, people are just kicking dust on his grave, basically. So I'm going to stick with the tight end theme for my third and final one, and that's Chargers tight end Hayden Hurst. There was some early in minicamp good reports of good rapport between him and Justin Herbert. Take that for what you will. But if we get more of that in training camp and preseason, well, then he's going to start to be a drafted player, more often. And actually, we're starting to see that in BBM. So, he's going to get more drafted in BBM, still very low percentage, I'm sure, when it's all said and done. But in a Timebox tournament, especially here in June and July, before we have training camp news, he's one that could be very low as an 18th round pick. And of course, I like it, in 3 tight end builds and when Herbert stacks the most. That's when it makes the most sense to me. But I think it's a tight end that, they have other, faces there. Parham, I believe, is still there. Disley's there. But, Hayden Hurst, is a good pass catching tight end that, it's not sexy, but it could just get the job done with an elite quarterback situation. Kind of the reverse of the whole Sam Darnold thing. He has like elite weapons. In this situation, Hayden Hurst has an elite quarterback throwing him the ball. And that's what I like about it. And getting such a low drafted guy. So I like both of our tight end call outs, because the beautiful part about that is, you can, get your 2 other tight ends whenever, however you want to, if you're deciding to do a 3 tight end build, and you can just get these guys in the 18th round. So, any final thoughts before we get out of here, Steve? And then I'll recap all of our points really quick.
So one thing that I'll say just going forward, and it kind of highlights what we've been talking about. Perfect example is Juwan Johnson. The foot surgery that he's had or having or whatever has already kind of put him down to the 17th, 18th round. Yeah. These Timebox tournaments going forward, I'm going to be taking him. All reports are he should clearly be ready to be coming back for the regular season. Maybe the first couple of weeks are going to be a little shaky, but here's a guy who, if he was healthy, he likely would have been steamed up through the camp process, steamed up through the preseason. And, could have been like a 14th round guy, 13th round guy. You're getting him 17th, 18th round. And you should take some shots in like BBM, but absolutely be locking him in this type of thing, because you're just taking advantage of that right now. And sure, everyone else has that information, but take advantage, because we know that this is a better guy and everyone's dealing with this injury. And we'll hear, maybe he suffers a setback and it becomes a bad move in the BBM and he doesn't play a single down this year. We don't know. But in the Timebox, it's not going to hurt you the same, or vice versa.
And the upside, again, in these Timebox just be so much more potent and powerful. So, no, I think that that's an excellent point about Juwan Johnson specifically. I liked your 3 players. I liked my 3 players. And again, to summarize kind of the strategies we're considering is mix up your strategy styles, especially in the lower price dollar tournaments. Because again, we don't know, we talk about, obviously you don't know kind of what first round or second round are going to be the guys you need, but we don't know what strategy you're going to need. Is it, zero RB that everybody's so high on? Is it hero RB? Is it double hero RB? Could hyper fragile become the thing we need? Do we need elite tight ends? Do we need elite quarterbacks? Could it be this value in the mid-range of quarterbacks is just what we want to hammer? We don't know. So mix it up, mix up your strategies. And don't be afraid to get creative. To Steve's point, don't be afraid to go overweight, especially in these like 10, 20 max tournaments where you say, I'm just going to go really heavy on a certain player because you're locked into getting them at the same ADP as everybody else with the same information as everybody else. If it goes wrong, it's not going to kill you as bad as it will in the BBM. And if it goes right, you can just, it's like basically on a DFS tournament going way overweight the ownership field, right? Like, so I love that, Stan, that you called out. So those are the 2 things about kind of getting creative on strategies and going overweight on players. Also, the second point is don't be afraid to mix up those combinations. Those combinations of the first like 2, 3, 4 players. Don't be afraid to get unique with like, maybe I'm, and maybe it's a guy I have ranked higher, but according to ADP, probably people aren't going to get to this combination. But like you said, in a BBM, maybe they eventually will, But in this, they won't, because
Mhm.
you're working with the Timebox. So don't be afraid to mix up those combos. I'll mention that Pat from Fantasy Dog Pound has a great tool, Best Ball Overlay, which we'll be promoting all summer. That'll help you check out your combinations in different tournaments, and that's something I'll be using a lot. So mix up combos. And the third and final point is what we just mentioned. Don't be afraid to draft those low drafted players, not a bunch of them, but one of them in the 18th round. I'm not saying to hammer, rounds 14th through 18th with all these scroll down guys. I'm saying in the 18th round, get a little creative and tell yourself, just like we say in DFS, tell yourself a story. Tell yourself a story. How does Sam Darnold have a successful season, or maybe start even in the end of the year? How does, tight ends like Zach Ertz and Hayden Hurst make an impact in the end of the year? How does a receiver, like I just blanked on his name, the receiver from Denver, Steve?
Josh Reynolds.
Josh Reynolds. How does he really become that solid number 2? Tell yourself a story and get some access to these guys that are going to be much lower drafted in these Timebox tournaments. So I think those are the key points, and that's something we're going to be considering. And the nice thing about this video is it's applicable all summer for these different tournaments. It's just you'll be considering probably different players as the summer moves on and news moves on. So this was very fun. It's helping me framework for these Timebox tournaments that I love so much and want to have so much more exposure to. But any final thoughts for you before we get out of here?
No, I think we covered it well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one that Underdog releases.
Yeah. Keep them coming, Underdog. We're obsessed with them. And yeah, I want to have as many of these as I do my BBMs, because I absolutely love it. So this has been fun. For Meg, for Steve, we will see you next time. And again, be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the Fanspeak Network. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.